Hello, everyone. We're just letting people into the room right now. It's just right at 6, so we're just going to take a couple seconds and let people sign in, and then we'll get started. Okay, guys, the way this usually works is that people start to trickle in as they wrap up dinner with their kids and all of that. So we'll go ahead and get started, and then we'll just let people come in as they get signed on. My name is Rachel Kinder, and I'm with Mission West Virginia. And thank you for joining us this evening for our webinar. This is the first one we've had in several months. And it also is kind of the beginning of our summer series. We will have 3 more webinars before we take a break heading into fall. So if you will check for that on our webpage afterwards or see it on Facebook. But right now I'm going to introduce our speaker today. This is April Dinwoodie, and I'm going to turn things over to her. The only thing that we ask is that we're going to hold questions till the end, and my coworker Kylie is here to answer chats or questions as they come up, and then April will have a session at the end for questions. So thanks everybody and welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for the invite to share and to be in community. It's a part of my, my joy really, honestly, is to come to the table to have these conversations and to share anything that I can, that will maybe make your journey a little more enlightened, a little smoother, more thoughtful. So please know that I come with great humility to this conversation and with joy, even though it's a tough subject. So for sure, just thank you for the attention, the respect, and Rachel and Kylie, thank you for doing everything to make this happen. I'm going to share my screen, and as Rachel did say, we'll be making room for questions at the end. Please use, are we using the chat or the Q&A? I can't remember. It doesn't matter to me. Which would you prefer, Rachel or Kylie?
Either one, either option would be fine. I can keep an eye on both of them.
Great. So as we go, just put your questions into the chat or into the Q&A. We'll be watching for them. And like Rachel said, we'll leave time for questions at the end. As you think of questions, though, be sure to hold privacy. I usually can get to the heart of a question without too many details. So as this is being recorded, we will continue with the recording at the Q&A portion, but perhaps maybe some of the Q&A won't be shared more globally, but this will be something folks can watch on demand, as they say. And for me, I am an open book. You can ask me anything. I will usually answer it. And I will just say that anything that I share here is obviously fair game to share because we are recording. We are talking about the urgency of seeing color tonight in transracial adoption and in this extended family of foster care and adoption. I'll be sharing a lot of my personal experience, plus a little bit of information and knowledge that's been infused into my my work, both by being a professional. I was the CEO of the Donaldson Adoption Institute, which was a research policy and advocacy organization for foster care and adoption. I started a mentoring program for youth in foster care where adopted adults like me mentor to youth in foster care. I do a lot of consulting in schools, bringing the adopted kids or kids who had spent time in foster care to affinity groups. And I do a lot of parent coaching and speaking and training, and I have a podcast, all the things. So this is my personal experience, plus the added benefit of being in community with several hundreds of families who have been connected to adoption, and that many more professionals who are doing the work of adoption. So you can find me pretty much anywhere you can find social media. You can find me. June and April are is my handle on Instagram, on Facebook, and my podcast you can find on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you can find podcasts. You can find mine. Born in June, raised in April. A few things to think about as we come together in conversation. I know we're not in real conversation, but this is as real as it gets in these times, so I'll take it. I call these the ABCCs: actively listening, avoid assumptions, and seek true clarity. If there's something that I say that just doesn't quite land, or you want to investigate that more, please do so. That's why we're here. Be present, stay checked in, commit to the practice of being effective at communications and conversations centered in complexity. So resist the urge to check out, even if it gets hard. Commit to that community. If you know someone who is on this webinar and something I share might activate them, or you think they might need to check in after, please feel free to do so. And if you need some support after, please seek that out. My DMs are always open. I'm not a mental health professional, but I know a lot of them. Just in these kinds of conversations, it's so important to take care of yourself as we also try to stay in it, even if it's uncomfortable. And then confidentiality, we gave a little bit of a word on that as we talked about questions. Just resist the urge to share any personal testimony that's shared here today. Mine is mine, because I share that for a living. Anybody else's testimony, please hold that as sacred. And resist the urge to play that back in real time with someone's name attached to it. We can often tell stories without having to name names. 5 core principles that I have related to the work that I do. The first is adoption is not a one-time transaction. It's a lifelong journey. Human rights for all humans. I believe that there's nothing more human than being born, and there's nothing more transformational than being separated from that family that you were born into. And I believe that everyone in the extended family of adoption and foster care have rights. Those are the parents of origin. That's my term for birth parents, parents of experience, those parents who are entrusted to children through adoption or foster care, and of course to the adopted person. We all have the right to our narrative, to our medical health history, to connections of biology. That's challenging. That can be challenging in different ways through our experiences of foster care and adoption. But I do believe that when you center on the rights of all of us as human beings, that is a more elevated way in which to experience this unique experience. The next one is children are not commodities. This is one where we know that there are market forces at play. We know that money is important in foster care and adoption, but where is that money used and how? We know that there is a long history of commodification and also racism and institutionalized racism that happens in foster care and adoption. There's no mistake that the green baby has $3 versus the other colored babies. We know that race matters in life, and it certainly does matter in the work that we do, whether that's private adoption, foster care adoption, and foster care. Money is there, and where it goes is important, and we need to look at that, but never at the expense of children, and never to commodify children. So that is something that we really have to think about when it comes to the dollars and cents of adoption and foster care. One more, and then another one after this, which is adoption in America lacks uniformity. And that's true, not just state by state, but it's county by county, it's city by city. Sometimes it's agency by agency. I often say there's law, policy, practice, and then people, because you could have a law, policy, and a practice, and then you have a person who has a belief system, and they will operate and move in such a way that they so desire. So it's really important with that patchwork of laws, policies, and practices that we know what policies are and laws are and practices with the individuals that you're working with, and to work to better understand what as parents who are entrusted with children through foster care or through adoption, to know what is something you can access through post-adoption services and all the things. So we know that is an important thing to acknowledge and then work within that knowledge. And the last is there will be no reform. We can't do better if we don't stay educated. And that's not just academic education. That is education through lived experience and listening to those closest to these experiences, namely adopted persons or those who spent time in foster care. And I am both. So all voices matter, but I just love when organizations center on adopted persons, because we have long gone without our voices heard. So it really is something I'm grateful for, and I take very seriously, and hold a lot of respect for folks who do center on our voices. Just a few more things before we jump into the main show. My approach to doing this work, whether it's coaching an individual family or working with professionals, or even in this moment, is understanding healthy identity first, then building strong relationships next. And that's not just relationships to human beings, that's relationships to difficult content, difficult concepts, difficult ideas. So you build a healthy relationship to some of those harder things. That makes you a better relationship to the human beings that are around you and to yourself. And the last is, once we do those things and we're in practice with that, facing and embracing differences comes a little bit more naturally, right? When we're in that flow and we're really activated and turned on to all the things that we have yet to learn and bring to the table through our own identities. And a few more things in terms of my guiding principles. Even the most vigilant eyes have blind spots. And what I mean by that is you could be doing all the things, and doing them well. And sure enough, you will have a blind spot, something new to learn. A new technology comes online that you want to embrace as a way to think about your family, your life, who you are. So, and we could be doing all these things, and then something turns a light on when we weren't expecting it. And that can also be growth, but that also can be like, whoa, I didn't realize what I didn't realize. The next is Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 Hours Theory. I don't know if you know that author, Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote Outliers and Talking to Strangers and a few others. He has a podcast. He does a lot of work with human relationships and identity. And he believes that it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert, whether that's swinging golf clubs like Tiger Woods. I just watched his documentary, by the way, brilliant, worth a watch. When talking about differences of race and multiracial ethnicities and family structures, really, really well done. But it takes 10,000 hours to practice something and to get really good at it. Shooting hoops, doing gymnastics, cooking a certain recipe, right? 10,000 hours is a lot of time. But how many hours have you logged in really understanding differences of race, culture, and class, your racial identity, right? How many hours have you logged into being in right relationship to that? And how many more hours do you need to become expert and really comfortable at doing this big work? And then the last one is, all parents and families are my parents and family. So what do I mean by that? Well, I have an amazing family that I love and adore and that I respect. They also could do better when it comes to having me as part of their family, a Black, biracial, transracially adopted person into a monoracial family, a white family. Even though I point out some of the things that I think they could have done better, that I wish that they would do today, that are different than what they're doing now. I wish they would expand a little bit more beyond where they are. It doesn't mean I don't love them, and it doesn't mean I don't respect them. And when I say certain things, or when I signal to anybody who's listening to me talk, and that maybe feel uncomfortable, just know that the spirit in which I share is very much about honoring what I consider, my centerpiece of my family, even if it's hard. So when I share that with love, with respect, and with the hope that what I share is impactful for you as we go. Speaking of my family, these are my parents, Tom and Sandy. They were high school sweethearts. They were in 4-H together. They were seen at the junior prom because my mom said if my dad did not propose, they were not going to the junior prom. So when they showed up at the junior prom, everybody knew that they were engaged because my mother had let everybody know that if it didn't happen, she wasn't going to the prom. So here they are on their wedding day, and they did what many couples did after they got married. They started to plan for their family, and they started to try to get pregnant, and it took them a while. It took them a while to actually get pregnant, and during that time was very difficult for them. So that's one of the areas we don't talk a lot about in adoption and foster care is infertility and ways in which it can be a challenge for families to be created, to be extended, and adoption and foster care being a way in which to do that. I often say that it's really important that any couple or individual that is desiring to have a family and maybe to do so the old fashioned way, if you will, really has to manage their own identity around parenting and not parenting a biological child. It's so important to heal from some of that that loss of not being able to parent biologically, but then also to think about what your life will be like as adoptive or foster parents. And quite frankly, that's not something my parents did. They wanted to parent, and they just sort of kept it moving. As life would bring them, they did get pregnant. If you ask them, I've interviewed my parents separately, and both of them at a certain point shared their best day ever was finding out that they were pregnant. Not the day the baby came, finding out they were pregnant. That shows you the joy and exuberance they had just being able to, with the hope of a baby being born to them. So many years into their marriage, they were pregnant with my brother, and they had a healthy baby boy. And of course, 11 months later, they had another boy, Jim, my brother, my second older brother. And then several years after that, they had another child, my sister, Dawn. And as they thought about their family and thought about how they might have the family that they wished, they thought, 2 boys and 2 girls, that'd be great. Like my sister was asking for a sister. One of my recent podcasts, I interviewed my sister, and she tells of how she really was like, please, 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 I want a sister, I want a sister. And well, the only way you guaranteed a sister back in the 70s was to adopt a girl. And that's exactly what my parents did. They started to make a plan. They didn't know much about adoption. In some of my trainings, I talk about this idea of relationships. What is your relationship to adoption and foster care before parenting in that way? What is it today? And what do you wish it to be in the future? If you look at it from my parents' standpoint, they had no relationship to adoption. No one really that they knew close in had adopted. They knew of a few couples that had, but they weren't close family relations of ours. And they didn't really have an idea of what that was all about. They learned as they went. And I love today that we have so many organizations that are preparing parents to take this journey of adoption and foster care in ways that I don't know that people thought of. Until in these recent years, and what a joy it is to see parents really digging in and preparing for that unique relationship to adoption and foster care. So my parents made plans, they started the paperwork, all the things, and then it was told to them that there was a baby girl. When asked if my parents had any requests or any desires when it came to the type of baby they wanted, and I'm using my language very carefully, this is how it was discussed, they just said, a girl. We don't see color. We could take a medically fragile child. We just want a girl. So when a girl became available, they were thrilled, and I entered a pre-adoptive home with my family. And then about 11, 12 months later, I was adopted into that family. But before I was placed with the Dinwoodies, I was in temporary foster care. And this is one of the only pictures I have of myself as a baby of this size during my several months in foster care upon leaving the hospital and then moving into temporary foster care. This is where I had my first Christmas. This is where for all intents and purposes, for all that I know, I was well cared for. With me came a few things. There's a pink blanket in there that I still have. There is also record of what I was doing at the time, what I liked to eat. There was a typewritten letter that signals that I had very good care in foster care, but I don't know. During this time of very closed adoption and foster care, I was moved from this family placement to my pre-adoptive home with the Dinwoodies, and there was never any more contact. So I often wonder if that family ever thinks of me, if they wonder what happened to me, if I had other children than I was around. So that just remains a mystery. And these are very sort of formidable months of my life. So I often wonder about this. And people will always say, well, you're a baby, you don't remember. I think babies' bodies remember everything. I think they know. And I think there's imprints on us, even when we're small, for good and for some of the challenges that come with adoption and foster care through separation. So before all of this, of course, I was born. And this is Helen June, my mother of origin. This is a high school picture that I received upon being in reunion with some half siblings and cousins. Helen, unfortunately, was hard to make a relationship with. She was hard to find at first, but once I found her, it was like 1, 2, 3. It happened pretty quickly in terms of getting in touch with her. But once I got in touch, she was very far away at the time. There was not an opening for a relationship. And so I got to learn some things. I got this picture and I learned a little bit more about her and my half siblings and my extended family. And I have met some family members, but she remains a bit of a mystery to me. So I love being able actually at least to look at a picture of her. And I love knowing a little bit more about her. And I'll share a little bit more of that right now. So Helen June, my mother of origin, was born to Junebug. Junebug is my grandmother on my mother's side. They called her Junebug, and Helen June, you start to see a theme here. Debbie is my older half sister who my mother of origin was parenting at the time, along with her twin and another brother. So there were 3 children already born to Helen that she was parenting. She was divorced and really hid her pregnancy from everyone. Her closest friends, ironically, her closest friend, who I did find, was also a birth mother and had relinquished a child in high school and was looking for her son at the time that I found her, and did everything she could to help connect me to Helen. So that was such a ironic sort of twist of fate, if you will. But Pat, her friend, left the planet without finding her son. And I always feel heartbroken for her and her son with these missed connections. So Pat did everything she could to try to connect me, as did other folks who knew Helen at the time, but there was a lot of resistance. And then Debbie, Debbie, who's their twins. I get Debbie, Donna, this is Debbie. And Debbie had a daughter who she also named June. So there was a legacy of a family name of June. And when my parents were thinking of names, they just decided on the name April. They had 2 other names that they were thinking about. Thank goodness they did not choose them. Later on in the presentation, I might share what those names were to give you some context, but let's just say that April was the better choice of the 3. And they decided on April Elizabeth. Before they knew that I was already June Elizabeth, during the finalization, the judge did say that my name had been June Elizabeth at birth. So it's just another irony. So everything I do is really born in June, raised in April. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the names are an interesting little side note, talk about synchronicity and irony. So I mentioned being in reunion. So I am in reunion with part of my family. This is my family of origin. Half siblings and half brother and cousin. And I call this my real family. I'm also with my sister, who I was raised with here too. She came to meet them with me. I call this my real family, my family of origin. I also call my family of experience, my adoptive family, my real family, because if one of those families is real, the family that didn't keep me and I wasn't raised with is real. And the other one that I was raised with is not. What does that make me? So I always want to hold a lot of language around adoption, which is so hard. People to this day will ask me, oh, do you know who your real family is? And I have to just sit with that. And it depends on the day. Sometimes I correct it, sometimes I don't. But we really have to help those around our family understand that naming one family real and one family not real it can be internalized by children, and that can be a really hard road to identity when we're not helping kids understand family and from that real perspective, because to me they're both real and they both matter. They're both a part of me. So everything that I do is really born in June, raised in April. That's my podcast. A lot of the work that I do centers around this idea of the calendar. Of course, I'm born in October, because everything makes sense. So what I do is I tend to deconstruct the calendar. And what do I mean by that? I take the calendar and I break it down month by month. I use the calendar as a device because it's something that connects us all. But through these experiences of adoption and foster care, the calendar can hit very different with all of us. So I use it to create this idea of celebrating and commemorating. We may want to put the adoption finalization day, but we also might want to put the parents of origin's birthdays or family members' birthdays on the calendar and just light a candle and have a cupcake and say a prayer or give a good word. This will signal to a child that all parts of them matter, because without those individuals, there's no child. So just honoring that and finding ways to use the calendar to do that. We can break down the complexities 1 month at a time. We just came off of Mother's Day. We're about to go into Father's Day. Those days can be highly complicated for those of us in the extended family of adoption. Who do we celebrate? How? In what way? Do we bring up parents of origin? Do we not? Is this about us as parents, or trying to center on children? It's a way in which to plan, right, for some things that might be hard. And then there are at least 12 opportunities to engage. Each month has a theme. And I do this very purposefully. Every month has a theme and ways in which we can get at some of this stuff that we know is coming on the calendar. So for me, complicated things are made easier when we can prepare for them, when we can put some themes in place, and when we can kind of just move in this flow that's like, this is just what we do as a family. We talk about things, we deconstruct them, we build new things, new traditions. So this is one device that has helped me become more focused on this work. So for me as a kid, right, I had a lot of questions. Where did I come from? How did I get here? Who are these people? And why are they all so white? Now, of course, I was not asking these questions as such as a child, but as I understood the world around me or worked to understand it, I did have some of these questions. And as my dear friend, Joyce McGuire Pavo says, she wrote a great book called The Family of Adoption on my podcast. She too had this experience of adoption and asking questions. And she says this: I would ask questions about adoption, and the answer would always be, could you pass the broccoli, please? So do not be the pass the broccoli family. If there are questions that come up, if you need time and space, it's okay. Parents don't have to have every answer at the ready all the time. But one, be prepared for those questions because they will come. And even if they're not coming, underneath, there is almost always some questions that are unsaid. So a lot of times parents will say, oh, my child doesn't ask any questions. But are you having that conversation to open the space up and to signal to your child that it's okay to talk about these things and to be open? So there are a lot of different ways that we can be open to these conversations. And one thing that was not discussed right along with adoption was differences of race. And there was a signal by the agency that transacted my adoption that race didn't matter. So this is the actual paperwork that accompanied me. And I got this paperwork as an adult. And it speaks of how I had a birthmark, and that birthmark indicated that I was of mixed race. And the paperwork goes on to state that a geneticist did see me and made the opinion that it was possible that you were biracial. And it also says here that, however, my mother of origin, my birth mother, did not indicate any racial differences in her or my birth father's family. She did insist that I looked very much like my birth father. So what does that all mean? Well, what that translated to was, oh, nothing to see here, nothing to talk about. Now, when you talk about this with my parents, my mom in particular, of course, she says, we knew you were biracial, April. If you go back to that little picture of me as I entered the family when I was small, it's clear that I'm of mixed race. I mean, you'd really have to be stretching it to think that I was not. And as time went on, as my hair got curlier and kinkier, it was obvious. And so they never denied that, but they also didn't lean into it. And really this, we don't see color idea was how they moved. So when we think of this, so when we're thinking about professionals and how they signal what is important, and really having parents listen. I mean, professionals hold a lot of weight with parents, especially parents who are parenting through adoption and foster care. They're the ones that we're hanging on every word. Well, if they say to do this, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, or at least trying to live by that. And maybe not all families, but a lot of families that I know are taking their cues from what professionals will tell them. And if a professional is saying, don't worry about it, just use the word adoption and don't worry about differences of race, don't worry, just love her. So that's what they did. But what they didn't know was this colorblind idea would have a big impact on me as a Black biracial child in a very white community in New England. So overall, this idea of colorblind, I think people like that idea. They think that is a sort of enlightened way to look at things, but it can signal that an individual's full identity can be overlooked, right? It diminishes the importance of acknowledging and celebrating differences. That is a big opportunity that is often missed when we have that colorblind idea. It leaves children and young people to navigate their full identity alone. And that's something we'll talk about tonight, which is, doing this work as an individual without the support of the people that I needed around me the most, my family, is big, big work to do. It leaves already vulnerable children and young people physically, emotionally, and psychologically unsafe. I didn't know until I knew what to expect, right? I didn't go out into the world with this. April, sometimes there are going to be some things that happen at school. Some people might call you these names. I was so ill-equipped when the N-word came. I was so ill-equipped when people were touching my hair and kind of making a spectacle of me, right, in this very white environment. I wasn't prepared for that, and without having some of these discussions about how to move in the world, it is leaving kids vulnerable. And certainly I did feel like I was vulnerable several times in the world, navigating as a Black biracial girl in a small New England white town. So I also loved this just as a way to kind of reinforce this idea. I don't see color, right? Does that mean you don't see me? And I often do feel like parts of me are not seen. My whole identity is not seen when people say that. I want them to see the beautiful Black woman that I am. I want them to see some of the things that have been hard for me. I want them to know that these things can be made better. And seeing color is actually an enlightened way to look at things, not something that is a bad thing. So my parents didn't see color, but outside in the world, other people did. So people did see the differences, and they did that thing, that triangle thing that you sometimes see parents do, and sometimes see people do, and sometimes I do when I'm out in the world. I'll just totally be honest. You're looking at two people or a person, or you'd be like, wait, who's connected to who? And you're looking at parents and the kid, and so people did see differences, and every interaction was shaping my identity, even if I didn't understand what words are being spoken. And a stranger invading our space, like, where'd she come from? Where'd you get her? Some of the questions you've probably gotten in with your family if you don't match. I didn't know what was being said a lot of times, especially as a kid, but I recognized my mom's body going rigid, or her body getting hot, or her getting activated or exasperated for some reason I couldn't quite understand, but I was starting to get it over time, like, oh, this is just what people do. But I was so confused by that. We never talked about it after. We just kept it moving. And my parents, while they didn't see color, they also did not see some things coming with that, which was other people in the community and in our family did see color. And one relative, actually, when I was sort of my debut party, if you will, my parents had invited some family members over to meet me for the first time. And one of the family members said, why would we want to come and see that? And they were no longer part of our family going forward. But my parents did not expect that to happen. For very often in my town, I grew up in a beach community, which in the summer had a lot of different people coming in and out. And oftentimes in the summer, people thought I was a Fresh Air kid. The Fresh Air Fund, for those who don't know, is an organization that brings children from the inner city, usually Black and brown, to communities, usually white. And in my community, we did have fresh air kids. So in the summer, there were a few more Black and brown kids around than usual. And people would say, "Oh, are you a fresh air kid?" And I'd be like, "Sure, I love fresh air. It's great." Until I found out what fresh air was. And I got the idea. I was like, "Oh, right. I didn't really belong there." Or they thought I was from somewhere else because I was brown. It took me a while, but I finally figured that out and understood it. And then, even adoption itself being weaponized by kids. Kids will find any way to be cruel. And adoption was one of those things where people would say, "At least my parents wanted me." None of these things were things that I went out to the world expecting or talked about. And soon after the first few times this happened, I also recognized that this was not a conversation that was going to be one that my parents wanted to have with me or would have with me. So I often just internalized a lot of this and kind of got through it myself. Look, I was also a very strong kid and my parents are strong people. So in some ways, what they didn't give me in some of that protection, I did learn and teach myself and learn from them to be strong. So it's a kind of a both and scenario, but I want all kids to be even stronger than I ever was and have parents sort of lean into some of this and expect maybe that some of these things might actually happen. Okay, hair, we got to stay on hair for a moment. Bad hair days became bad hair years. Today, we have so much that we can look at resources for hair that there's just no reason why parents can't do better. My dad resorted to cutting my hair, not a good look. Because my dad cut my hair and cut it often very short, and I was a little bit of a tomboy. We grew up on a farm. I often wore my brother's hand-me-downs or my sister's hand-me-downs, or really my brother's hand-me-downs through my sister. Sometimes people thought I was a boy. And so I also, think of that in terms of identity development. I always wanted to be a girl. I presented as a girl. I wanted people to get my gender right. And sometimes on top of everything else, there was this question of like, is that a girl? Is that a boy? That can land on kids in a specific way as well. My mom would ask people on the street, how'd you do that? If she saw someone with an interesting hairstyle that was a person of color, I was embarrassed, but also secretly I loved it because that meant she was trying. So that was kind of this like kind of a mix of emotions. And then this is a big one, a lot of inappropriate hair touching. I take this so seriously as a kid every day. And even as a grown-up, just recently, the last couple of years before COVID, I was out and with a bunch of friends. And before I knew it, someone was literally, as she's asking to touch my hair, has her hands in my hair. And I'm like, my friends were like, "Oh, you told us that kind of stuff happens, but we hadn't seen it in real time." So from as long as I can remember until most, even recently, in the last couple of years, people find their way to invade my personal space. I think this is a really important thing for parents, especially parents who are parenting kids of another race, Black or brown, to protect your kids and to teach them that it is not okay for anybody to touch their hair without permission. And, we ask people to pet their dogs. Honestly, we can do so much better with this. And people think it's cute. And sometimes a parent will say, "Well, my kid really likes the attention." I would really question that. A lot of times what may seem and come off as like, "Oh, this is cool. Like, I like it when people do that," is about belonging and fitting in. I never liked it when people touched my hair, but I often pretended like I did because I didn't want anybody to not be my friend or not think I was cool or to ruffle any feathers. But that kind of thought pattern can lead to other things that are not healthy for kids, especially kids of color, when it comes to inappropriate touching. So I do take this very seriously. It's sort of a gateway to other things where people feel like they have control over persons of color and can touch them in any way. So some people think I go overboard. I don't think we can talk about this enough. So always please protect your kid and model and even role play. "Hey, if someone touches your hair, that's not okay. And here's what you can say," or, just prepare kids for the inevitable. People can't resist the urge. Trust me. If it wasn't for COVID, I'm sure it would still be happening today. But we'll see when the world opens back up and what will happen. I'll keep you posted. There's a great book called Don't Touch My Hair by Cherie Miller. Great book, really about celebrating hair, but also creating the right boundaries and physical and emotional and psychological well-being for children who may have interesting hair. So I love this book as a way to to help people understand and to help educate kids for what can be their personal space is so important. Today, I'm happy to report I love my hair. It's taken me a while, took me many years and many different ways in which to learn how to care for it. It took moving to Harlem to find the salon that was right for me, but here we go. So it's possible. A couple more things, as a kid and even as a grown-up, there are lots of assumptions and stereotypes we make around persons of color. People thought I could do things. Sing, run fast, break dance. I'm just saying, play basketball, all the things. And when I couldn't do all those things well, it was like, is she real? Is she for real? Microaggressions, we've heard this term, I'm sure. Those little tiny little digs like, oh, April, you're so well spoken for a Black girl, or for, sometimes I wonder, this has gone on, this has been something that's gone on for many years. And I often wonder if it's a combination of being a woman, adopted, and a person of color, where sometimes people are surprised by certain abilities or the way in which you move through the world. So microaggressions are a really big deal. And there's a great series on MTV's Decoded called Decoded. It's on YouTube, DE/CODED, Decoded. Great videos about race and but race, microaggressions, history. These are probably for teens and up. There are some, there's some language in there, but I suggest, as always, you watch before you watch with your kiddo, or watch with another adult and have a conversation. But MTV's Decoded has a great one about microaggressions. Really great. So tools in the toolkit, things to watch. And then this idea for me was a lot of times people asking me where I was from. Happens all the time. I know what generally they're asking. They're not asking where I'm from. They're asking, why is my skin brown? And so often they would not be satisfied with Rhode Island. I'm from Rhode Island. Well, they go, well, where? Like, there's a lot of Cape Verdeans in Rhode Island. Are you Cape Verdean? So they're really asking about my ethnicity. And being a mixed race person, that is often a hard question to answer, even if you're not adopted. When you are adopted, it gets much deeper. And again, depends on the day, depends on what I want to say. I have done my DNA, 23andMe, Ancestry, and Family Tree DNA. They all come back the same, part West African, part European, and a little bit in between. So I do now have the knowledge of where I'm from, and depending on the day, I'll let people know. So I wanted to share this little clip from well, let me go back one second. I'm going to do one more thing and then share a little clip with you. And remember, questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to them. And anything and everything is open for discussion. One more thing, we talk about the months of the year. Well, February is an interesting month for me because February is this like intersection of love through St. Patrick's Day and then Black History Month. We talk about all these things mashing up. So in that month, I usually talk about love and self-love and racial identity. And here are some of the things that I talk about during this time. And wait, going too fast. How to Love a Transracially Adopted Person is a series that I've done for about 5 years now. And it really is a deep dive into this idea of love and identity and being a Black, biracial, transracially adopted person. And it's kind of the most vulnerable writing I do. You can find it on my website. I do podcasts about it. And there are two different parts to this. And the first is this idea that for as long as I can remember, my family telling me, oh, your birth mother loved you so much. That's why she didn't keep you, or that's why you were adopted. And we loved you so much, which I love. I think centering on love is beautiful, and love is kind of this key ingredient. But love isn't where it stops, right? That conversation cannot stop at she loved you so much, because to me, as I thought about love, if she loved me so much, and love is this idea behind adoption, well, won't everybody ultimately leave me, right? It's like loving and losing were inextricably linked, even with this beautiful container of family. So my suggestion with this is always, you can center on love. And to be clear, my parents didn't know that it was a loving decision made. That wasn't part of what, they didn't have a conversation with Helen. So they didn't know for sure that that was the case. I'd like to believe that so much of what we do in adoption and foster care is rooted in love, even some of the hardest situations. and it takes grown-ups to really steer into what is at the center of love, and how can we find a loving narrative for children who have been mistreated or abused? How do we find that centering on love, um, around this experience? And I do think that there are always ways, even under the hardest circumstances, to make that connection to love. But it can't just stop at, they loved you so much, that's why they did this. We've got to continue that conversation. Usually it's so much harder for the parents than the kids. So parents, do your work, have these conversations, like practice, get into those deep feelings, and let them be a sort of a gateway to a shared empathy for your kid, for a shared sadness and grief that you can work through together. But you lead the way, you do your work first, you model what it looks like to be in a healthy relationship to a complicated experience, and then make that space for your kid. The other piece of this is, self-love through racial identity. And I had to come to that on my own. I had to do a lot of that racial identity work on my own to find that self-love. And I'm still working on it. I'm getting there, but I'm still working on it. But all these things did impact my love relationships, and intimacy and emotional safety. Adoption is not an excuse for not having a love life, a good love life. And I'm not suggesting I don't. But I do think that the work I've had to do to find out who I am and be comfortable in my own skin and my family structure has taken a much longer time for me. And I'm just one unique individual. But I do think that, the sooner we start to kind of get at this idea of love and know that love and abandonment does move through romantic relationships. And I know it's probably early on for some of you who are parenting younger kids, but something to think about as you do parent and as you go along your journey. I'm going to now shift a little bit to this navigating the world as a transracially adopted person. This is Marcus. Marcus is a friend. He was on my podcast. He's also a mentor in my mentoring program, and he talks a little bit about his experience here. And I'll just let this play.
It's like you're at the center of having to navigate these two worlds of your inner family environment fully embracing you and loving you, and then this outer external environment that you have to interface with, where people don't understand it and you have to explain it to other people, and then you have to understand it for yourself as well. So it was like a juggling act growing up.
So that's Marcus. His experience is very similar to mine, although we're decades apart in our experiences. He's much younger than I am. And, talking about this, navigating the two worlds of adoption, this like your inner family where you don't have to make any explanations. Everybody's, on the team April and team Marcus. And you go outside and it's a whole different world, and sometimes you're not prepared for that world. So one of the things that has come up for me in these last several months is what I've learned from the pandemic. And I'm going to share a few things that have tracked with me in the hopes that you'll find a gateway to maybe understanding a little bit more about this experience of adoption and differences of race, and not to exploit the pandemic, but really to leverage it in a different kind of way. And before I do that, I just want to make sure that everyone hears from me that if in fact you have been impacted in a way, if you've lost someone, if you have suffered through COVID, please know that I hold a lot of space for you. And I talk about this not to expose anyone's pain or anyone's suffering or loss, but rather to maybe utilize this experience, this collective experience we've had, as a gateway to understanding a little bit more about adoption and differences of race. So I'm going to steer into this again. Thank you for being open to letting me share a little bit of this. So we're at this intersection, right? We've got COVID-19, we've got family, we've got Black Lives Matter and identity. And in the middle of it is transracial adoption. Like, I don't know when maybe we're thinking about transracial adoption, whatever point we were and on our path to being parents through this experience. We didn't think of all these things, right? Now we're smack in the middle of it, and no better a place to dig deep and to understand what we might learn than professionals or parents in this experience of adoption and foster care. So, and part of this is about identity. What I recognized very quickly early on in April of last year, where it hit me really hard. Like, wow, we really have to know who we are today. If we don't know ourselves and we don't have this sense of like what our value systems are, who we want to be around, what we can tolerate, how we want to move in the world. If we didn't know that before the pandemic, we sure as heck better know about it going forward, because we've got to make really, in some cases, life-altering decisions. And the only way to do this is to have a healthy holding of who you are and what you value. Doesn't mean all of our values have to line up. I kind of wish they would, but that doesn't mean that's the case. But knowing who you are and being convicted in that, I have respect for. So one thing that's helped us kind of get there is this idea of collective trauma. Trauma is a word that's used a lot in adoption and foster care. Some of us understand it, some don't, some are learning. We've got more resources, and we're looking deeply at research about what it means to be separated from family of origin, and what the impact of early life trauma is on all of us. But when we think about trauma, this idea of any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, and unpredictable. Ring a bell to anybody? COVID-19 maybe? Prolonged, overwhelming, unpredictable. And when these things continue and they get compounded is when they go unexpressed, which means we're not talking about them, unprocessed, which means we're not talking about them and talking through them and making space for these experiences, and they're misunderstood. There's really confusion and chaos, right? So now, this is what I've kind of come to put these things together, that now the rest of the world has an even closer relationship to trauma, something so many of us in the extended family of adoption already have, right? We already have an understanding of trauma, whether we know to call it trauma, whether we understand the sort of the academic pieces of it. We know what it's like to have this experience of trauma. Now, so many more of us do. And I hope we're talking about it. I hope we're processing it. I hope we're not just bearing these feelings, because letting them have air is going to be the healthier way. Great book that's out there right now, Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing. Dr. Bruce Perry has done some amazing research on foster care and adoption and trauma. There's a podcast, you should look it up, with Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. They don't really name adoption and foster care as a thing, but you will see, if you have this experience, you will see some parallels to what Bruce Perry is talking about. So I love this book, and I love Dr. Bruce Perry and all of his work. A little bit more as we go here, this idea of lack of power and control. As we close this session, we'll think about the next one. And I want to give you some power and control, which is something that you haven't had a lot of these days, which is, where should we go next? How deeply do you want to steer into these pieces and parts that I've activated and maybe brought up some deeper questions? So right now, power and control is a big deal. Like, we don't have a lot of it. I've often felt that way in my adoption experience, that all these grownups made all these decisions without really thinking of me. And I didn't have a lot of power and control to change things. And you know who else was adopted that you may or may not know is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs had a failed adoption, and then he was adopted by his family that raised him. And in one of the more recent not documentaries, this was a feature film with Michael Fassbender. It was written, the screenplay was adapted by, from the Walter Isaacson's biography, which is a beautiful book. Steve says, when his CEO says, "Hey, Steve, why do adopted people feel more rejected versus selected?" And Steve responds, "I feel like I was left out of the loop of the most important decision of my life." And now, to be clear, not everybody can make the decision of whether or not they get adopted, right? Like, some teens do, who have been in foster care, and some children who are experiencing step parents, and the things will be asked to contribute to what they want in a situation of parentage. But most of us don't really have a control over being born or being adopted. So this idea is one that you're like, well, who really does have power and control? But when you are adopted, and so many chess moves have been made for you, you do feel like there's been a lack of power and control. And what did Steve do? He went into innovation mode. And what did he create? These beautiful, amazing devices that are about end-to-end control. Guess what's compatible with Apple? Nothing, right? So without adoption, I don't know that we would have Apple products. That's just my theory. And I have a soft spot for Steve Jobs. He was often given a lot of what for because of how he operated. People say he wasn't a nice guy. Like, I have such a deep respect for him, and I understand where he's coming from about this power and control. And some people might call me a control type A person. So anyway, well, remains to be seen. A couple more things, and then we'll see where we are and see if there's some questions we want to answer. This next one hit me really, really hard, and I hope it's a gateway for this deeper empathy for balancing family of origin and family of experience. We've all been separated by the pandemic in different ways from family. We can't see our immunocompromised sister. We want to protect grandma and grandpa. We know family is there, but we don't have access to them. And this has been a drumbeat in my life. And it's been something that people didn't have an understanding for until now, I think, right? So this idea that the rest of the world now has a difficult lesson in what it feels like to know there's family there, to inherently know they're there, but to not have access to them. And how that can feel. And I know it's painful for some that haven't been able to see family, but I just want there to be hopefully an opening for some softness around, hey, I know those people are there. I kind of miss them. I don't even know why I miss them. They're just part of me, but I need some space to process that. I need to understand that. I need to make a way to have a relationship with those people, even if it isn't real time. And even if it's not this like big, happy family sitting around the Thanksgiving Day table, I need to know about those people. I need some touchstone to those people. And the last couple, isolation. This feeling of being alone in some of these feelings of adoption and foster care. It's kind of this constant drumbeat of like, oh, that's not unusual to be isolated and to be this sort of in this little cocoon space that you don't think anybody understands. And trust and believe this isn't someone who hasn't been on her own journey, right? Like, so I recognize that just saying, oh, they're never going to get it and understand, that went out the door when I became a young adult, because I have to give space to people to understand and to get there. But I hope that isolation becomes less and less and less, and it gets that opening to more fully experiencing adoption and foster care happens earlier and earlier for kids, not when you're grown and you've done a lot of this work yourself. I hope that grownups and parents and professionals and those entrusted to children and young people can make that opening sooner, so that there isn't that isolation and that aloneness. And this last one is really important about getting back to seeing color and having an empathy and understanding for something that isn't your experience. And this really did hit me with a ton of bricks, because I was thinking about it. I had moved back to Rhode Island, or I was here temporarily through the pandemic. I'd been in Harlem I left at 17. I was in New York and other places, mostly Harlem, for 25, and came back to Rhode Island recently. And I was thinking about this, navigating this white town again as a grown-up, and thinking about how it was landing on me. And then the pandemic on top of it, and people were like, oh man, I can't believe we can't go to the store, we have to wear masks, and we got to be 6 feet away from people, and my goodness, like, it's just like, it's too much. It's exhausting every time I go to the grocery store. And I think to myself, as an adopted person, especially a Black, biracial, transracially adopted person, I spent much of my energy clocking every single move I made and thinking about how my actions might impact other people. And that's just not my physical movement. So when people started complaining about, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, or I'm tired when I come back, and I was like, welcome to the party. Like, my negotiation of the world physically has, for as long as I can remember, be one where my head was on the swivel. Like, am I safe? Am I okay? Now that has to do with, I think, family separation and trauma of that. And I also feel like it has to do with being a person of color in the world. Making sure my operating system is in tune with what would be over policing, either too much attention or not enough attention, having to move through the world, always putting my products in a bag, always getting a receipt, moving with absolute precision in the world in order to keep myself safe. I taught myself that, right? I taught myself that. I understood it. Once I understood, I was like, oh, right. Like, I'm going to have to adjust myself. And when I think about people moving in this way now, and how upsetting it was to people to have to change their operating system. I'm like, y'all, welcome to the party, right? So there's the physical movements, right? So just sit with that. Think about it as a person who is likely, if you're white, if you're white and economically privileged, moving through the world is vastly different than a person of color. And it's hard to simulate that, right? Like, we don't go around like having these experiments. Well, let's see how this feels or that feels. We just don't. But COVID has been a big, hard experience, and in some ways a simulation for that which so many of us are already doing in our physical movements. But I think there's another piece of this too, which is our relational and our conversational movements. Moving with precision also means that I have to be careful how much I talk about birth family. I have to be careful how much I exhibit my joy at being in reunion for my family of origin, and my sadness for not being able to meet my mother of origin, and all that came with that second rejection, if you will, in life as a grown-up. My family has a hard time. They're getting better, but has a hard time understanding why this would be important. Aren't we enough? Don't you love us? Why is this important? And it's so hard to have to physically negotiate certain things, but then also to relationally and emotionally negotiate these things. So it's a both and when it comes to these moving with precision. So back to this idea, it's exhausting to view the entire world as a potential threat. As we come out of this pandemic, we go back out into the world. So many young persons I know, especially those who are adopted transracially, that are Black and brown, have been sort of shielded by the pandemic a little bit, right? Being indoors and being protected. Going back out into the world means we have to double down on the talk. We need to have the talk several times over time in different ways with different persons, hopefully with Black and brown persons that you know coming into your family environment, and like family members coming in saying, this is how we have to navigate the world. This is what you need to be thinking about. So, but it's exhausting. Like, how many people have come home from the grocery store and been like, I'm so tired. It is labor to be out in the world and to have your head on a swivel and making sure you're safe. A few more things on this. Be aware how these last few months have been for you in terms of having to reset your personal operating system and how that's felt. And that might be a gateway to how others feel who have to move differently like this all the time, pandemic or no. These negotiations of complicated environments aren't just physical, they're also emotional and relational, as I mentioned, like what types of conversations, space for conversation are you making in your families? And like I said, the talk has to happen early, often, and with many members of your extended family. I hope and pray that if you are parenting a kid of another race, that you have a real network of folks around you and your kids and your families as extended family members, as people who come in your home, as a part of your family to help with this. It's a team effort in order to keep kids safe emotionally, physically, and psychologically. And then create this culture of openness where adoption and diversity are discussed. If you're just moving the spirit of this is how we move as a family, this is how we talk, these are the things that matter. It doesn't always have to be centered on your kid. Oh, honey, we're going to talk about this now. No, you have that conversation with your partner, with family members, even like let your kid hear. One of my biggest things for kids who are adopted, they have big ears. Adopted kids have big ears, right? I can hear people talking about me in another room, another state, maybe in another galaxy, but I'm testing those skills out. But seriously, I'm always sort of waiting to hear someone say something about me. And as a kid, I sure was waiting for any clue about anything with this like mystery life that I didn't know much about. So it's important that you as a family openly talk about these things and resist the urge to, when you're not talking about them, say, oh, my kid's not interested because they just don't talk about them. Well, if you're not talking about it as a family, I could bet that you're not making enough space for your kid to feel comfortable and confident to speak openly about some of the feelings that come with this experience. And this is where I pause to say, how are we doing? Should we look at the chat? Are there questions? Should I keep talking? Oh, no questions yet. I see no questions.
Well, you just touched on a question I was about to ask, so I thought it might be a good time to interject that question and then also give people some space to put their own questions in the chat or the Q&A. With my son who's 6, who is adopted and biracial, sometimes I feel like there's a very fine line between celebrating his racial identity and singling him out. Like, hey, look at this great Black role model versus you're the one Black child in the family. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's really, it's a long tail on this, right? And one of the things that I often encounter is this love for culture and, if your child's Black, biracial, a love for the child, but not the full authentic love for the culture. What I mean by that, I think about like assessing personal operating systems in homes, like how much have you embraced in your home diversity, and take your child out of it for a second. Like, you look at your recently watched on Netflix, look at your iTunes playlist, look at your bookshelves, look at your art on the walls. Have you fully embraced all of this that's not centered on your kid? Like let's pretend you don't even have a kid. Let's not do that. So how much of this is your son or daughter seeing you love culture, really love it, not for them or because of them, but because you love it, because you feel inspired to know more. Oh, I had no idea that song is really an old jazz song from, I had no idea that. Look at your bookshelves. Is there a mix of books? So you can just point, can you go up and down the bookshelf and point to one and pull out more than half of books that are centered on diversity? If not, then we got to reassess that environment, because I feel like that's the beginning piece of it. Then when you're moving in that spirit of this is just how we move as a family, it becomes less centered on your child, right? It's less centered on, we're doing this for you, because with that comes complexity, because at some point you're like, is this for you or is this for me? And this extra labor and effort you're pulling in, mom and dad, that kind of makes me feel like it's a lot of work for you and it feels weird, right? So I feel like it's a real full-on family system shift to signal that this is authentic love of culture, not for you or because of you, but because of me. And I love this because I love it. And it just so happens that you're a part of that too. So it becomes a little more organic, if that makes sense.
It does. It makes a lot of sense.
One of the things that we've noticed through the pandemic as well is that it's been a big reckoning with families that realized a lot of the culture that they consumed or internalized lived outside of the home. Because when we weren't able to go to that class, go to that more integrated place, go to, that barber, we realized that, oh my goodness, we did not have this living and breathing in our homes. It was something we went out for, and nothing will smack of inauthenticity than something that doesn't live and breathe in your house every day in some kind of way. So there's a whole workshop I do on on evaluating your operating system, and really how parents kind of do that exercise you just did super fast and you cataloged it in your brain. But I suggest everybody's going to sit down with a pen and paper and kind of do that exercise, maybe with a partner, a friend, a mate, someone and you look and you say, oh snap, like I thought I was woke. I thought I was more diverse, and look at this, I'm watching all this. It doesn't mean that what you're watching is bad. It just means that, like I said, kids have big ears and eyes. If they see you only loving culture in connection to them, it may not ring as authentic.
That makes sense. It's also interesting that you can put almost a positive spin on being quarantined, because I've seen so many families say, we can't get out and experience culture, and I like you putting it back on, but this is your time to examine your home and your personal life.
Yeah, look at
It's
that
a good way
article.
to look at it.
Yeah, like what could you bring in? Like what ways in which could the whole family start to embrace multiculturalism? I often say that my parents, adopted me and they kept doing white things, and white things aren't necessarily bad, but it was just a shift that they didn't even know to make. But now as I am able to find the words for what I think could be a path forward, there's all kinds of ways to bring in that culture, and even create a culture of advocacy and um, social justice. Now, not everybody has to become an activist, but become an activist within your family, which is looking at data from school systems, looking at our Black and brown kids suspended at a higher rate in school and out of school, which in most cases that is true. So understanding some of these things, even in community, like get to know your local police and law enforcement, understand maybe what their data looks like. So even becoming a culture of, we know data and statistics, we hold people accountable, we make sure people know us as a family, right? Because what you'll hear oftentimes in social justice and advocacy work, and if you talk about law enforcement, if someone is a known individual, if people know who you are, there's more of a case of leniency and understanding and being in relationships. So there's a way in which to be in this place of advocacy in close in, where you're understanding and advocating and you're modeling what it looks like to kids to hold other grownups and professionals accountable in a safe and productive way.
Sense.
Cool. All right. Any other questions? That was sort of primed us up a little bit, but I've got more, so I can keep moving if that makes sense. Does that sound good? Okay.
That's great.
So I'm going to go a little bit into how I did form healthy identity even without the guidance of my family. So here's the good news. If you think I'm great, which you might not, if you think I'm great, just imagine how great your kids can be if you start doing some of this work younger. Right? Sky's the limit. And like I said, there's been a long tail on me getting really comfortable with who I am and understanding myself that I wish could have happened a little bit sooner, but here I am. And let's hope that maybe we can close that gap between here and there for some of your kids. So healthy identity, as you saw, I talk about identity a lot, and this is such an interesting thing that I just came to the realization of, for so many years, we've been expecting adopted persons and those who had spent time in foster care to do some of the deepest and most profound identity work with almost next to no guidance, and sometimes without so much as even an acknowledgement of this complex and this huge human labor. So we just think, oh, new family, new identity. No, you don't need mirrors. Don't worry about that. We're just gonna move through this experience and you'll be fine, right? So now it's like, I'm really in this spirit of the grownups. It's time for you to do your identity work. And it's exciting. It's great. It can be fun. It can also be challenging, but it can be fun. So that's what I hope that you can see this as one of the biggest and best pieces of work that you can do for you and your kids. So you saw all the different facets of April. So this is from a healthy identity standpoint. This is kind of how it started and how it ended. And then what my questions were. She loved you so much. I talked about that. That equated to me, won't everybody leave one day, right? If that's the case, like if loving is people leaving, being separated, how do I close that gap? You're so lucky would come up often. People would say, you're so lucky you're adopted. And on the other side of that is, will I ever be grateful enough for this family who has stepped in when my mother of origin could not? Where are your real parents? The question comes up, if these aren't my real parents and these are my real parents, and what am I? Am I real? People asking kids, were you in an orphanage? What was that like? And me asking the question of like, oh, did my parents die? So all these things that were kind of milling around, because all I knew of orphanages is when children lost their parents, and that wasn't what was told to me. Where are you from? Right? That question came up so often and still does. And that would like engender me like, am I weird? Do I not belong here? What do you mean? Where am I from? I'm from right here. Is that your girlfriend? Now this one, as kids get older, me being with my brother or my father, two white, or my brothers or my dad, two white men. Sometimes people thought we were boyfriend and girlfriend. I mean, could you really? So this happens. And when people don't match, society cannot resist the urge to try to connect you in whatever way they see fit. And then this idea of, at least my parents wanted me. Am I a bad person? Why didn't they want me? And often that question that came up. So this is what I think really helps with this building a healthy adoption identity. Recognize and work to heal your grief and loss. There is loss in adoption and foster care, no matter how you slice it, for everyone. So make sure, as a grown-up, as a parent, as a professional, you are leading your own healthy journey to grief and loss. Help children heal from their grief and loss. When you do your healing, you then can be a gateway to healing. Put that oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on for someone else. Face and manage the complexity and discomfort and the insecurities. Just because a kid wants to know their family of origin doesn't mean that they don't love you, and doesn't mean that they're going to want to leave you. They may, you never know, stranger things have happened, but most of the time, this is about an extension. It's about adding, not subtracting. Prepare for those inappropriate questions and treatment from family, community, professionals, and strangers. So many people don't understand adoption. They have these narratives out in the world that paint this either too rosy or not so rosy of a picture of adoption. The reality is we live in between, in the real space. Educate yourself and others about the both and of adoption. Sometimes Mother's Day can be hard. Auntie Joe, we're not going to come over for Mother's Day. Sorry, Mom. We're going to go to the park today. All of it, like all these different things that can come up with the both and of adoption, and not seeing it as just all one dimension. Obtain as much information as you can about family of origin. And I mean, keep this information safe. If you can't have a real relationship with family of origin, find touchstones where they, even with challenging life circumstances. I know this can be hard for some families where there's safety issues and all the things. Ask questions. Were mom or dad really good singers? Did they play basketball? Were they an artist? What were some of the physical character traits that we might want to know, or that a kid might need to feel tethered to their grounding? And let's just say this. Let's say there's no way to find this information. I would venture to guess that there's always a way to find something redeemable in the matrix. If your kid's really good at something, my gosh, honey, I'm really not good at basketball. Like, you must have gotten this from your family of origin. And even with hard things happening in life, there are really good things about the people you're connected to biologically. We really have to center on those things so that healthy identity and that healthy connection to adoption can be made. Not tolerating adoption related jokes. So often in conversations, people will say, well, oh yeah, like, oh yeah, they said I was adopted, like it'll be a glib remark or something. And that can leave kids going like, wait, is adoption bad? Is that bad? Or nervous laughter. Just really make sure that you can easily correct these things. Hey, like, we don't tell adoption related jokes in this house, or we don't really talk like that here. Adoption is something that we experience, and it's a unique experience. So maybe you want to read this book, or find a way to make space for helping that person who's saying those things through that, and to model for your kid what it's like to have agency over your own narrative. It's so important. Build and create a community of adoption. Don't let your kid be the only one. Organizations are making spaces for families, and that's beautiful. It's so great. Model what it looks like to be in healthy relationship with family of origin. And even if that means you're not all, cozying up and singing songs around the campfire, find a way to find a healthy holding of that relationship, even if it's in conversation. That would be a really great signal to your kid that there is a possibility of that connection over time. Anticipate and prepare for questions and confusion. Just know that imagine you're a grown-up and this is hard and you know all the information. You've got more information than the kiddo does and it's hard. Imagine what it's like to be a kid not so sure about some of this stuff and those questions that can bubble up. And then recognize what might activate you. Where are you feeling uncomfortable? Where do you get a little hot and go, oh my gosh, that's hard? And help families and family members in school and other people understand that as well, because there are things or lesson plans that can be hard for kids. This idea of adopt a highway or adopt a pet, or these things that can, just can be harder for those of us who have been around adoption and foster care. And then of course, TV and movies can be difficult to internalize. So anytime, there's a great website called Adoption at the Movies. I don't know if they've updated it recently, but there's a great website where you can look and kind of look for a movie that you think may have an adoption or foster care theme, and then get a review. And I always say, like, watch some of these things first before you watch them with your kid, and just make sure that you have an understanding of how you might feel or what you might say about that. Did I see something pop up in the Q&A?
Yes. Hey, so we have a couple questions that have come in. So first, when you were talking about, your mother and family of origin, and how do you talk about love of origin of parents when, the parents abuse drugs and some of their choices affected the children? How do you deal with that? And how can you talk about the love of origin of parents?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like as first and foremost, as a parent, you've got to find that loving place first, right? What does it look like to look in your family relationships, minus adoption? Was there anybody in your family that made some bad choices and you love them just the same? You may not be in relationship with them in a specific kind of way because it's unhealthy for you to do that, but you can still find love for them, or you work to do that. I think grownups have to start there in terms of, how can I really find a place of love? And depending on the age of the child is how you can share some of that harder information. But the gateway to that is, honey, I've really been thinking about this, and it's kind of hard to think of anybody being anything other than sort of perfect for you, but not everybody is perfect. And there are some things that have been really hard that have happened to you. And there are some decisions and choices that have been made that are really hard, but that doesn't mean that those people connected to you are bad. There are some things that I can share with you if you have some information. If you can go back to an agency or even check in with that family system to find out if there are some things that, hey, I know that Joe, had some challenges with drug abuse and things, but was there anything that Joe did really well? Like, was he an artist, or do you remember anything that he did? And again, if there isn't something that you can anchor to, find something your kid is really, really good at, and maybe that you're not, and say, wow, like, you're really good at that. I'm not, and neither is dad or partner or whoever, other people in life are who are impacting this child, and say, this has got to be from your family of origin. And even if there are some hard things that happened, there are some good things too, because you're good. And, we deserve to talk about the good things and the hard things. So I think there's this delicate balance, but I think it begins with the grown-ups. So often grown-ups are having a hard time internalizing the good parts, because, as rightly so, and I get it, how can anybody hurt this child or this baby? And remember, everybody has a childhood. ACEs, early adverse childhood events, are real. Look, read that book, What Happened to You. Not what's wrong with you, what happened to you. And you will see, especially for persons of color, not in this book particularly, but generational trauma is real. And I'm not making excuses for bad behavior, but I'm saying, like, look under the hood a little bit, settle in with yourself on how you feel, and get the support you need to find love and a soft place for these individuals who without them, there is no your child, right, that you're entrusted with. So I hope that helps. There's a lot more to that, but I think it always starts with the healthy holding of the grown-up as a gateway to experiencing, and explaining things to kids. And And it's okay not to have the answers, and it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be confused. You know, honey, I'm confused too. It's not an easy thing to explain or talk about, but we're going to talk about it now. And would you like to sit on my lap? Can I hold you when we talk about it? You know, there may be some other sort of ways in which to create a holding space for this, even when it's hard. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Not an easy answer to a tough question.
I think that's great advice. We have one other question. We have someone who says they have 3 transracially adopted children who all have the same birth mother, but different fathers. One child, they do have contact with their birth father. However, the second and third, you know, one, they know a name and have a picture. The third, they know nothing. So do you have ideas for how to balance this between the children?
Sure. The same goes for what I talked about before. It's like, you know, how are you holding as parents these different experiences and information? And you know, that's got to be hard on you. So when I hold that space for you, because like as parents, you just want all your kids to have everything. You want them to have everything. You want to give them everything. And these are some things that you may not be able to negotiate. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, what else can you get, right? And I suggest this. I know people have different relationships to privacy and for the different platforms, and I know they're costly. So, but this is just one of the suggestions I make. If there's a way to do a 23andMe or an Ancestry and not turn on the Find My Extended Family relationships until a child is, to a place where they can be in that relationship, and you can help guide that. But you can turn off all of that stuff until you're ready. But you can kind of do DNA as a family. Everybody in the family does it, right? And you all look at your results and you compare and you contrast and you say, wow, these are some grounding anchors. And then just, look, if you're doing everything you can to find these pieces of information, you can honestly say, look, we're doing everything we can. And at different age appropriate levels, sometimes we just can't have the same experience across the board. Look, some in biologically related families, some kids have just a gift for something and another kid doesn't. I mean, it's a tough thing for all of us as human beings to negotiate, especially for parents of who love their kids all the same and to this high degree of output of love, but there's just some things that you're not going to be able to offer to the same across the board. Make space for that pain that comes with that, and you may have to find a way to negotiate. Look, guys, this is all going to be for Susie. Going to do something special for Susie as a way to just mark that we don't all have the same information, and maybe you do something for each one of them that's slightly different, but that holds them all together. Maybe it's a new tradition that you come up with. Maybe invite them to be part of this with you. It's okay not to have the answers, but the thing that I think will settle you is that you're doing everything you can to get those answers on behalf of your kids, whether that's through extended family. Is there a cousin, a grandfather, a great grandparent, an auntie, someone attached to that family system that might be able to tell you a story about when birth dad was young. It's hard. I mean, the competing interests of adults are real, and in families that have challenges and who have had challenges over time, it gets really dicey. But I think if you center on the truth and what and you do everything you can to process yourself and then create that space for your kids, you'll get there. It's going to be hard, though. It's going to be hard, and watch the dynamics of the kids as they get older. Right. With that interplay gets really, really challenging. So hope that's helpful. Not a great answer, not easy stuff, but the fact that you're here, you're asking the question, you're going to go do your work as you are. That's going to position you well for how this plays out over time.
That is all the questions that we have so far. So
And I think we're almost out of time, right? Is that where we, oh, okay. But, so I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say. Well, that's sort of it for now. We do have a second round, which I think given what we talked about, it sounds like building culture through extended family, and building a culture in your home of diversity. Oh, Tracy, you're really bringing it. It's been really hard. Adoption situation affected your friends and dating choices. I'll answer this one and then I'll close up, but we'll lean more into the next time, more about building culture within the family. And, Rachel, if anybody gets in touch with you between now and then about topics they want to cover, let me know and I'll make sure we cover it. But Tracy, that's why I started writing How to Love a Transracially Adopted Person, because it's been so hard in romantic relationships. Friendships, not so much. I mean, friendships, I get very attached. I have some longstanding friendships that, mean the world to me. My biggest and best gift to myself has been being in community with other adopted persons, because I didn't have that for the better part of my life until I started doing my search. And when I did, it was to the moon. It was a whole new life and identity for me, for people just go, yeah, I get that. Wow, you felt that way when you looked around that Thanksgiving Day table and didn't see anybody that looked like you? Yeah, that. Like, so there was a real sense of community that shifted. And, abandonment is real. Thinking people are going to leave, like organizing it so you leave first. That's why I'm not married. I'm not going to blame adoption on my single life, but I will say that, like, coming into who I really truly am as a woman of color has taken a long time, and I'm a little bit of a late bloomer. So it feels like it has impacted my life in a lot of ways, particularly stemming from that conversation we didn't have about love as adoption, is a loving thing. And it was, but that we didn't have that rest of that conversation about the why. So it's impacted my life in a lot of ways. And we can talk more about that next time too. I see Becky's talking about people making racial remarks. I have several friends who are biracial. What do you say in front of adopted children if someone makes a racial remark without upsetting them worse? Look, great question. One of the greatest gifts I think you can give to children is to model what it looks like to create safe emotional and psychological space, and to put barriers and boundaries up. And there are sometimes you're going to need a harder hand. There's sometimes you're going to want a softer hand will prevail. But I mean, watching you say, excuse me, can I have a quick word? Just want to let you know that that's not acceptable for me or my kid. Holding your kid, making sure your kid is close to you, but you can talk low. But keeping your body next to your kids to hold them tight in the moment. And say, I'm not trying to take this any further than we're going, but that's not how we talk in our family. And that's inappropriate. I'm going to leave it here for now. But if you want to talk about this more, if this is someone you care about, if this is not someone you care about, you say what you say, you keep it moving. And then you immediately go to a soft, quiet place, sit, hold your kiddo and say, I'm so sorry that happened. That was really hard. Are you okay? What do you need? How can I help? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sit and I'm going to get a box of tissues because this made me really sad. I'm going to cry. Right? Like, just making that space so that you can acknowledge and process, but you can handle things in the moment. And, creating that ongoing conversation about what the world's going to bring may make kids feel worse in these moments. That's why physical touch, that's why some comfort food, that's why some kind of a soft landing, maybe, just different things that your kid better than anybody. That's what the world is going to bring sometimes. So in the moment, it might feel worse, but giving kids that, like, hey, like, yeah, this isn't okay. And I watched my mom or dad do that thing. I could probably do that too. Really will set them up for how they'll have to move with precision in the world. So I hope that helps. Yeah. And if there's more that we want to explore as we come back to this in a few weeks, that would be great. So I really appreciate everyone. Rachel and Kylie, thank you for making space for me tonight. It was a real joy, and we'll be back before too long.
Yes, thank you so much. I learned so much, and I just have many thoughts in my head now, and just appreciate all of that you shared with us. Kylie put in the chat, the next webinar is June 10th, same time, same place on Zoom. Just a heads up, we'll send out a follow-up email. Check your junk mail if you don't have it by end of day tomorrow, because they do tend to end up in there. And Kylie and I put our emails there if you need to reach us for anything, and if you have things you would like to address ahead of the next webinar. So thank you so much, April, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks, y'all. Take care. See you soon. Okay, be well.
Good night, everyone.